Hi, everybody. Dermot O'Shea here. I'm the host of the Antenna podcast, and today I'm delighted to have Dr. John Sanford as a guest. John, would you like to say hello?
Hi, everybody. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me, Dermot.
Yeah, no, really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. Yeah, John, maybe you just want to introduce yourself and give us a kind of a quick overview of your career in the antenna business, so we can, introduce the audience to
Oh,
you.
sure. Well, I've been around a while, so I've had quite a few jobs. But I started my career at the Georgia Tech Research Institute, and that was doing a lot of military work, a lot of these phased array kind of antennas. You often see on the news the Patriot phased array. The U.S. is shipping that somewhere, and I was always working on that. That was a project that was very active when I was at Georgia Tech Research. So just that product, other kinds of military communication systems that were state of the art at the time. I showed up there, I knew nothing, but luckily I had understanding managers who kind of helped me along until I could figure out what I was doing. And it was a great place to start my career. And then after a few years, after 4 years,
And
I
and
moved.
what your interest in antennas in the first place to get you into like, was it something you had been interested in before, or did it happen at Georgia Tech?
No, it actually happened when I was doing my undergraduate at Syracuse University. I started as a mechanical engineer, actually.
Oh, okay.
And I remember I was going along on the mechanical engineering route, and we reached a class called mechanical vibrations. And, a lot of people are familiar with this Tacoma Bridge that the wind started blowing and it oscillated and fell down. And I really liked that kind of math of vibrations and oscillations. And, um, and I noticed that was popping up in some of the electrical courses I was taking. So I decided to shift gears and start focusing on electromagnetics. And I was really captured by it because so much of our senses are electromagnetics. For example, our eyes are basically antennas. We rotate them around, we see things, and electromagnetic waves come in, and we receive them, process them with our brain, very much like a communication systems. And it just goes on and on. Our sense of touch are these electrons going around the nucleus of atoms, and they repel each other. So there's so much. Most of our life is electromagnetic. All of our experiences are electromagnetic. And chemistry of the valence electrons and ionic bonds. So I really, got entranced by all of that. And, it spills over into other fields like acoustics. Acoustic waves are a little, they're pressure waves. They're not electromagnetic waves, but a lot of the math is the same. And even quantum mechanics is a wave equation, plugging momentum and energy into that. And it's the same kind of math we learn in electromagnetics. So it gives you a great insight into the world. Besides being a good job in designing antennas, has been great. So beautiful math um, and an insight into the world. And there's only so many antenna engineers. Most people avoid it, no matter, it's a lot of fun, but for whatever reason, people hate those classes when they're undergrad. They seem difficult, I think, at the time.
Yeah, that's hence the reason for a shortage, I suppose, that we have.
Yeah, yeah. But it's only a few Maxwell equations. There's only four of them, right? So I'm a lazy guy. I'm like, oh, there's only four equations. Let me learn these four equations, and then I'll have a career. So that's kind of the way I
Well,
was looking at it.
well,
But
that's a great advertisement for those interested in getting into antennas. Four equations is all you need, right?
yeah,
Um,
right, right.
and then, okay, sorry to interrupt you. Then, where did you go from Georgia Tech and those like, interesting phased array projects?
Well, I did a vacation in Europe, and I'm a nerdy guy, so I was traveling around in Austria and Switzerland, and sitting around some cafes, and there were pretty girls who would talk to me. So I thought, hey, this would be a nice place to live. So I went over to work at Huber and Suner in Switzerland, and they were a connector company at that time. And I told them, hey, why don't we start an antenna group, and we will design antennas for this thing that people are talking about, cell phones, not really cell phones, but cell phone infrastructure that people were talking about. And this was the time of Gordon Gecko having his giant phone going around. And we debated whether anybody would ever want a cell phone or whether it was just some kind of weird fad. And but they let me do it. So early on, people were using Yagi antennas and dipole antennas as base station antennas, and I convinced them, hey, why don't we try these microstrip patch antennas and make base stations out of that? And it kind of caught on. Today those early antennas from Huber and Sooner are sort of an industry norm. Most antennas you see on buildings are flat patch antennas in big panels. So we had a lot of success introducing the technology. I would say in hindsight, though, we should have patented a lot of that technology, which is on me. I didn't do that at the time. I was early in my career, didn't really know what I was doing fully, but that was a great experience. And while I was there, I did my doctorate at EPFL in Lausanne, Switzerland. Worked with just crazy smart people there, and sometimes I'd show up there for the classes. I'm like, I don't know why I'm here. Everybody's so smart, but they tolerated me, and eventually I did my doctorate on Leeuwenberg lenses while I was there, and then I was offered a position at Chalmers University in Sweden. So by then, these antennas I was designing with my group were kind of catching on. So maybe I was getting a little bit of a name in cellular communications. So they invited me up to teach there, and they had some really great people. Persimmon Kildall, he's a well-known guy in the antenna field, invented all kinds of new technology for antennas. Ahmed Kish, he's head of the IEEE AP, was there at the time. Jiro Hirakawa. So that was really a top group in the world when I was there. So I got to kind of sponge off and learn a lot from these guys. So I did that for a while, but then I got lured to Silicon Valley by a company. Engate was the name of the company, but they were trying to do a system very, very similar to Starlink today. But this is, I can't remember, early 2000s, or late 1990s, actually. And it was just too far ahead of its time. The mimics and all the technology wasn't ready. So, we had to adjust the roadmaps. But working in Silicon Valley was great. People were so ambitious and had these dreams of starting these companies and really changing the world. And, I kind of caught that bug a little bit. So I started my own company, Smart Waves, and we went along working with all these other startups, JetCell, Clarity Wireless. Some of these companies became very big companies, and we were doing kind of the RF bit for all of these companies. And it was just great energy. The company was, we were pretty successful, and eventually we were acquired by another company, Remic. So I spent a lot of years working at Remic. But Remic was eventually acquired. And, at the time I was CTO of Remic. I was like, well, this company acquiring us already has a CTO, so I'm going to do something else. So I started another company, Optimal RF. And that one got acquired also by Cushcraft, big name in the antenna field at the time. And then we were in turn acquired by Laird. So, I continued to support that as best I could for quite a few years. And then I decided to retire for the first time. So I came home, my kids were young, and I thought, hey, I'll spend a lot of time with my kids. But that's when I learned that children are very immature. So there's only so much catch you can play or building tree houses. So after about a month of that, I was like, oh, I'm kind of itchy to do something again. And one of my buddies from the Cushcraft days, Ben Moore, he was working with Robert Pera at Ubiquity Networks. It was just starting. There's like 4 people working there. He said, hey, we could really use your help. And I'm like, I'm retired. I don't know. But then I met with Robert Pera, and Ben and Robert, they're very, very smart guys, really ambitious guys. And they were building these radios that were so inexpensive. It was just amazingly inexpensive. And they said, well, we want to take these radios and we want to make outdoor products out of these. So I was like, I know how to do that. So I decided to join the companies. We started designing antennas and RF front ends, hooking up to these radios, and it just went gangbusters. And I don't know what Ubiquity is worth today, but it's a lot.
It's done very well. Yeah.
And it was so fun. We were just cranking out, at the time, 8 or 10 or 15 of us, as the company grew, but we were cranking out a new product every month. I had all this AI design software that I developed with smart waves and optimal RF. So I could produce designs extremely quickly. Robert Pera, he was very, very open to trying new things. So we were putting these products out there. The WISP market it was a nascent market at the time, so people were understanding. And Robert set up a site where people could take the products we were out there, and then they could comment on them, and they would say, "Yeah, this is terrible," or "This is great." But all of that feedback coming in was so useful that we kept being able to design better and better products over time. So I went along doing that for, I guess, 8 years and hundreds of products. And, the company grew and eventually did a pretty big IPO, and, it continues to grow. I thought when I left, maybe the company would collapse. That apparently I wasn't that important because the company's grown a lot since I left. But, Robert's a very smart guy, so they were in good hands. So then I retired again, and I thought, well, this time I'm retired for good. But then the chancellor of UCSD called me up and said, "Hey, we want to have somebody from industry come in and make our students more practical, and be able to come out of the school and be able to walk right into industry and be very productive. And we'd like your help doing that." So I joined UCSD. Taught a few classes, advised a lot of students, and tried to do what the chancellor wanted, which, of course, some of it's technical, but some of it were things like how to read a balance sheet or how to read an income statement. And, these are things I feel all college students and all really employees should know how to do. Of course, you have your own business, and, you'd like to see, hey, I'm a design engineer. Where do I fit in this balance sheet? And you tell them, oh, you're this little thing in brackets here. That's a negative. That's a cost, And so you got to earn your keep, right? You got to be working and producing value. And so, that I was pretty happy. The students I advised there, they all ended up in great positions all over the U.S. And I'm just kind of ramping down from that now, and now I'm doing a lot of work on all kinds of crazy futuristic antennas. UCSD, not only was it teaching, but it was a great learning experience for me because they have such a breadth of technologies at the university. You're always seeing people come up from other disciplines and like, oh, I have no idea what this is. And then you sit there and kind of get your arms around it. And it's often something you can use in your field. Maybe it's a new manufacturing technique, a new AI technique for doing optimization, or some new electromagnetic theory, whatever. It's always good to be a sponge and learn about all these different things people are doing.
Yeah.
So now I'm trying to take all of that and kind of bring that to industry, bring sort of the future, because research universities, they work on things 5 or 10 years out in the future. So I'm trying to take some of the ideas I saw there and turn it into reality for industry today. So maybe that's a long-winded explanation. But.
That's great. And yeah, because you've had, such an exciting and varied career. I think I'm surprised you got it done in that time. But I've seen that with UC San Diego myself. There's a lot of, there's even the 5G Center for Wireless Communications, right?
Yeah.
The Jacobs School of Engineering. So you definitely have a lot of, even collaboration opportunities, and real, industry seems to also get more involved at that university than what I've seen in some others.
It's a great school. It really is. Great students and a very strong, hardworking faculty. Good
stuff. Yeah, and you mentioned one thing you mentioned there that I'd love to hear your view on was patents. You said, I wish we had, done more patents in your early days at Huber and Sooner, but and you would understand it more. I think I love that you were in ME first, because like ME is so important when you're designing antennas and the feature, especially when you're maybe intending on filing patents, to include the features and techniques of the design in the patent. But at the same time, it seems to be quite easy to get around patents with antennas, right? Because you can go, okay, they've patented the design, but I could just modify the design and get the same output. Like, what's your view overall on patents? Like, what would you say to students that come up with a new antenna design there? What would be your advice?
Well, I guess for patents, patents are a business decision, right? Are you going to get a return on investment on that patent? And it depends on your situation. If you're a startup company, maybe the acquirer gets the return on investment, and then maybe it increases the equity value of your company. So is having a strong patent portfolio going to make some future equity event a lot more valuable? So there's that kind of situation. But you want to have broad patents that are defendable. So you don't want to have like, all right, here's a little antenna and I bent it like this instead of like that. That's probably not going to do much for you. So I think you have to do that analysis. The engineer who files for the patent, he's got to say, well, what if somebody tries to work around my patent? What are they going to do? And now figure that out and figure out, do I still have just assume people are going to do that. Do I still have a return on investment on that patent? Because obviously, if you have a good design team, you could file for lots and lots of patents. I think I have 100 and something patents, but some have a great return on investment. Other ones probably weren't worth patenting. At the time I thought they were, but maybe they didn't have a big return on investment. And then the company is the company going to defend the patents? That's another piece of that puzzle in making that decision. So patents are both a way to protect creativity, but they're also they're obviously a cost. But it really comes down to that business decision of how am I going to use it? It's something you have in your portfolio as the company, and am I going to be able to reap some value at it? Just like choosing to do a new design, should I choose to do that new patent?
Yeah.
Because you can keep it a trade secret, right? You don't necessarily have to patent it. And sometimes it's know-how. For example, using a lot of these AI techniques I use for design, they would be hard to replicate because it takes so much of these special evolutionary tools or AI tools that I employ to do it. It would. I don't need to patent every little piece that comes out of that. I can just keep that methodology and know-how as a trade secret.
Yeah, I think that's probably the most useful way for a company to have it as well. And so, just to go back to the engineering aspect of things, like is there a project you can talk about, maybe an end use case or a project that like you really enjoyed or you're most proud of or you think is super cool that you could maybe talk about?
Well, that's, those kind of questions like asking which was your favorite child.
Okay.
Depends a little bit on the day of the week, probably.
Yeah.
I was last year, my wife and we went on a safari in South Africa. So, we were traveling around a little bit and we were on the highway and we were looking over these townships. And at Ubiquity, we made these extremely low cost radio links. So at the time, you could buy an Ericsson Mini Link. That was about $10,000 a link, would be the very cheapest Ericsson Mini Link. And the comparable 300 megabit, in fact, I've got, this would be an example of one of these Ubiquity systems. You just plug the Ethernet here, plug it right in your computer, and you're off and running. And you can, I don't know what these cost today, but I'm going to say $80. I mean, there's other versions with reflectors that are longer range, but you were going from a link of $10,000 to a link of $50 per user if you were on the low end. And while we were on the highway, I looked out and I just saw Ubiquity. Within my eye shot, I could see thousands and thousands of these antennas popping up from the township. So I think from an application standpoint, the fact that, changing something that was $20,000, $10,000 service to something that was just as good, but you could do for $50, and bringing that kind of service to people, I think that was very rewarding project. What I'm working on now is also a very interesting project. It's phased array antennas. It's a product called O10, and these are optical phased arrays. So they're actually on a MIMIC, a little tiny chip, produced just like an Intel chip, just like an Intel processor, exact same process, more or less the exact same process. But you can put a phased array on the chip that works in the infrared spectrum. So you can have this chip, and let's just say it was on your phone, and you've got the chip, you made a little window here. It can send an optical beam right off the phone and connect with something else. And it can connect at like a terabit kind of speed because it's optical, it's so high in frequency. But even more than that, because these antennas are so tiny, antennas shrink when you go higher and higher in frequency. And when you get up in the optical frequencies, they're tiny. They're a fraction of a millimeter. So now you can fit 100 of these phased arrays on a single chip. So if you could imagine, this isn't the core application, but if you had something like a phone, now you could connect 100 terabit links to 100 different devices simultaneously. So this is an example of looking out in the future of what could be possible. And all of the radio, everything can be built into that chip together with these optical phased arrays and form hundreds of beams that can go off and connect to all kinds of things. And you can imagine applications like coming from your phone. You could imagine these things on drones. And maybe the biggest application would be for these huge server centers that they're producing today, where you're trying to form optical connections between GPUs, CPUs, memory, all these kinds of different devices. So I think that's something for the future. It's going to take a little bit of time. We've got working prototypes of those now, but there's still a lot of work to go. But certainly for the cool factor, it's amazing. And if you're an antenna engineer now, the same techniques you're learning now can be applied to these semiconductor processes to design antennas like this. So the fact that you might know how to design an RF phased array, you can use a lot of that same knowledge to port to an optical phased array. Not one-to-one, but gives you a good head start.
Yeah, but if you've done it before, you have the theory and the understanding and what you need to do. Like we've done arrays. I remember when they talked about using 27 to 29 gigahertz here in the United States for 5G, and we did massive MIMO antenna arrays. But even at that frequency, they were still quite big,
right?
And they were very costly. And I think one of the challenges the operators really had was the cost to implement these systems was going to be like astronomical, basically. Yeah. And they paid for the spectrum, but they're still not using it for that reason, right? So
yeah, that's a great point, Dorman. Another project I'm currently working on, it's Reflectech. You could look it up online, but a big part of the cost of these phased arrays is they take so many MMICs, the microwave integrated circuit or millimeter wave integrated circuits. So you've got to put these MMICs all over, and maybe you have 10,000 elements. So you need some thousands of MMICs to hook up to all of these things and do all the beam forming and scanning. So a project I'm working on now is a reflector array, and it doesn't use any microwave MMICs. It uses electrical reactive fluid. So what you do is you make a PCB board, and the PCB it has some gaps in it, and you can fill up that PCB with this fluid. In this case, kind of a liquid crystal kind of fluid. And then when you give it an electrical bias, the energy that hits off the elements on the board and reflects, it changes the phase. So instead of having MMIC phase shifters, you actually have this fluid, this electroreactive fluid be the phase shifter. So you can imagine instead of having a 10,000 element array with some thousands of MMICs, now you've got a PCB board that you're just building off at some fab. That comes up, you pour this fluid into it, and then you just give this fluid a relatively low 1 kilohertz, 4 kilohertz bias. And now you bounce the beam from your feed off and you can scan it around. You can connect to satellites, or you can connect to different, you can use it for the applications you were talking about, the 5G cellular at 39 gig or 28 gig. But it's really a fantastic approach when you need very, very large arrays, because the mimics, the more elements you add, the more mimics you add. Here, well, I poured in 1 ounce of fluid, or I poured in 1.2 ounces of fluid. But it's really a different cost paradigm for big arrays.
Yeah, and that's what's really needed to enable that technology is the cost factor and size factor, right? The usability and all that. So very good, interesting stuff, John. Maybe you can share some of that with us afterwards for people that are interested in finding out more. But just to quick deep dive into what we like to do here on the Antenna Podcast is for the guest to pick one technical topic that he or she personally feels is important that listeners can learn from. Something I've asked you about in advance. So hopefully you've got something you could share with us, and maybe we can also have some materials available on the website afterwards around that if people wish to find out more.
Oh, sure. I'll try to do that. Well, back around, I think it was around 2000 when I was still at SmartWaves, we were supporting all these startup companies. And one of those companies was Raycom, and another company was Clarity Wireless, and Stanford University, University of Texas, Austin. They were all emphasizing this MIMO technology. So I started working with Dick Roy at Raycom, Greg Raleigh at Clarity Wireless, and I had some friends from Sweden, Mats Wiberg and Bjorn Otterstedt. And these 4 guys were all pioneers in this field of MIMO. MIMO just means multiple input, multiple output, but really a technology that has really changed the wireless industry. It's dramatically increased range and capacities of these kind of systems. And the way it works is traditionally, just like we were talking about before, phased arrays, the energy would come in and we'd put phase shifters at all the different elements, set them to a particular phase, and then the energy would get combined into the receiver. And by setting all the phases, we'd set all those phases to be the perfect phases to get the maximum energy into that receiver. And likewise on transmit, we would transmit from there, and it would come out, and it'd come out of the array, and it'd have all the perfect phases to form a beam in a particular direction. So it's phased array beam forming, and that's a technology that's been around for a long time. But what happened here is computer processors started getting faster and faster. And that enabled this idea of MIMO, where if you've got an antenna sitting here, you might say, all right, what phases do I want to have to receive that signal coming from some distant place? So maybe I've got this up on my house and I'm trying to communicate with a cell phone that's up the street somewhere. Well, I can form a beam in the direction of that cell phone, and that might be the best. But maybe that guy's behind the trees. Maybe it would be better if I bounced it off somebody else's house and got to that guy. You just don't know. So what we can do, kind of a layman's way of saying it was, well, we'll take all of these elements and we'll capture the power from all of those elements, and we'll store it. So we actually, rather than combine it with an RF phase shifter, we'll bring it down and we'll actually store it in memory for a little bit. So we have let's say we have 10 elements. We grab all of those individual signals and we store them. And now that we've stored them, we can combine them in all kinds of different ways to see the best way to combine it. So we could combine it in such a way that, all right, it just forms the typical phased array beam coming from that user. Or we could combine it in such a way that it bounced off the house. Or through some fancy mathematics that these 4 guys all worked on extensively, we can just keep combining it in different ways and use all of those patterns to give us the best possible signal to noise ratio. And you can do a bunch of matrix algebra. It's things called singular value decomposition. So these guys were all working on efficient algorithms to combine that received signal in the best possible way to get the best signal and noise ratio. And that was really a game changer in wireless communications. And then once you knew that best way to receive the signal, if you were transmitting on the same channel, you could just transmit with those same weightings, send that beam back exactly the same way it came in. And you would get to that person with the best possible beam that they could receive. So that's kind of the crux behind MIMO. And if we're doing antennas, I've got one here. This was one done for a company, Quantenna. I think they're part of On Semiconductor now. And you can see this kind of crazy looking thing. So this one, instead of being an outdoor cellular antenna, it's more of a Wi-Fi system. And what they did is they wanted 12 channels, 12 MIMO channels. So, of course, I do a lot of AI design. That's why these shapes look so crazy. But each one of these is covering the 2.4 gigahertz and the 5 gigahertz bands. And, there's all these cables on the back, 12 cables on the back. And we design these things in such a way that they produce the optimal patterns for receiving and transmitting. But when you do MIMO, you can do one of two things. On the extremes. One could be that example where I want to receive the maximum range. So I've got this thing on my roof, it's upside down on the ceiling, and somebody else has their phone or laptop all the way across the house. I want to get to that guy, and he's far away. So I need a good signal and noise ratio. So what I'll do is I'll do beamforming. I'll use it in that particular mode. So I'll find all the amplitudes and phases that will get the signal from here to there. And now that guy can communicate back to this. So the second capability of MIMO is on increasing capacity. So in the first example, we just formed a beam, and it would work just like a single antenna from this location to another location, but we would be able to get more power there so that we'd be able to realize the link like that. But the alternative is to increase capacity a lot. So since this has 12 individual MIMO channels, we'd like to use all of those channels and get 12 times the capacity that we'd normally be able to get. So on the back of this, there's a whole bunch of cables, 12 independent channels. We can bond the 2.4 gigahertz channels to the 5 gigahertz channels. And we have all these different antennas on here. And this would connect to another one of these that might be in some remote location. So, for example, one of these antennas would connect to all 12 of the other antennas. And this other antenna would connect to all 12. But there's some special mathematics in the MIMO that will separate that out into 12 individual channels. And it does so by taking advantage of the multipath of the situation. So this works really well indoors, where we have reflections off the floor, the walls, things like that, what you'd call a multipath rich environment. And we can, technically you would say you're orthogonalizing all these channels. So instead of just having one antenna connect to one, all 12 antennas connect to all 12 other antennas, but then we run through this mathematics and it gives us 12 individual channels. So we get 12 times the capacity. So we get less range in that case. We're not beamforming to get a lot of range. We're using a different kind of MIMO functionality to get 12 unique channels. And that was a huge breakthrough. And now the systems, they work on a range of this. It can decide how many MIMO channels it wants to have, individual MIMO channels to up the capacity, or does it have to up the range? And it can actually do this on a packet by packet basis. So the software behind this has gotten so incredibly smart. Now, the reason all systems don't do this is it requires a lot of processing power. So in these kind of bands, like at 2.4 and 6 gigahertz, we have enough processing power to do that. If we were trying to do a huge phased array with 100 elements at millimeter wave bandwidths, there's no way to do that. We still have to use the RF phase shifter methodology and create a very narrow beam to go from one point to another point.
Really interesting, yeah. And John, we get the question we always get about MIMO is, well, this is quite a large structure to put inside my router. Why can't I just use 12 separate antennas on the outside, right? But you kind of can't control things then if you do that.
Yeah. Jeremy, that's a great point. Now, if you look at this antenna, it's a crazy looking thing. And I know you've got a staff of people, they do similar work to what I do. You can see these are totally customized designs. And they're designed to be what I would refer to as the patterns are orthogonal to each other. They do not couple together. So if this antenna is radiating, I want it to connect to another antenna, but I don't want it to connect to these other antennas. So you can see in this example, there's some little posts here that are creating that isolation. And the requirement here was to have 20 dB isolation between all of the antennas. And even these individual antennas, this is not one antenna. This is actually, each one of these is 4 antennas. It's 2.4 gig band with a certain polarization, with 2 polarizations, and it's 5 gigahertz with 2 polarizations. So to create a structure like this, with all of these channels, with enough isolation, is a non-trivial thing to do. You can't just grab an antenna and start plucking it on there and expect it to have very, very high performance from a MIMO point of view. And I know companies like yours, you can take somebody's product and start integrating in tau glass antennas and figure out the right orientations, positioning type of antennas to do those kind of things. But if somebody just grabs a bunch of antennas or screws on the outside of it, obviously 2 vertical monopoles, they're going to couple together like crazy, and you're going to lose a lot of your capacity.
No, and it's something a lot of people don't think about. They go, well, I have MIMO now, and I can use all these antennas, but they don't measure or think about isolation and how much that affects. You're almost like, killing the advantages of having the MIMO system in the first place by having these 12 separate antennas without any thought of placement and isolation. But we sometimes people have to learn the hard way. Listen, John, that was fantastic. I just want to thank you very much for your time today, and it was a great discussion. I think we could talk forever on it.
I enjoyed it.
But I really appreciate it.
Okay. Thanks so much.
Thanks, John.